Hello and a very warm welcome. You're watching a special edition of the NewsTrack. We are broadcasting this morning from Washington, D.C. This is day 3 of Prime Minister Narendra Modi's visit to the United States. Yesterday, the focus was on President Biden and the meetings at the White House. Today, it's Business and Diaspora Day. And that's my top focus on the NewsTrack.
A visit transforming India-US ties. A visit forging a partnership for future. The world's oldest and largest democracies.
Great democracies, India and the United States.
Prime Minister Modi and Biden toast to two great powers.
Two great friends, two great nations, and two great powers. Cheers.
Namaste America, live from Washington, D.C.
One of the questions that Prime Minister Narendra Modi has been asked in the build-up to the state visit to Washington was questions around human rights in India, democratic backsliding. This question was posed by Sabrina Siddiqui of the Wall Street Journal in the Prime Minister's press conference with the American President. The Prime Minister taking that question head-on, not just in the press conference, also later at the U.S. Congress, reaffirming once again his commitment to constitutional values, his commitment to human rights, his commitment to democracy, and saying that every single time, every action of his is measured and compared and tries to live up to everything that's written in the Indian Constitution. So there was no ducking and weaving in private conversations from what we're told when this issue came up and in public. The Prime Minister reaffirming once again, very emphatically, India's commitment to human rights and to democratic values.
As you stand here in the East Room of the White House, where so many world leaders have made commitments to protecting democracy, what steps are you and your government willing to take to improve the rights of Muslims and other minorities in your country and to uphold free speech?
मुझे आश्चर्य हो रहा है कि आप कह रहे हैं कि लोग कहते हैं नहीं, भारत डेमोक्रेसी है.
Asked on India's democratic credentials and rights of Muslims, the Prime Minister made an emphatic answer at the joint briefing with President Joe Biden. Prime Minister Modi was answering to Wall Street Journal's Sabrina Siddiqui. The Prime Minister's body language said it all. He removed his earpiece to make his point with full authority.
What steps are you and your government willing to take to improve the rights of Muslims and other minorities in your country and to uphold free speech?
मुझे आश्चर्य हो रहा है कि आप कह रहे हैं कि लोग कहते हैं नहीं, भारत डेमोक्रेसी है. और इसलिए जब आप डेमोक्रेसी कहते हैं, जब डेमोक्रेसी को स्वीकार करते हैं और जब हम डेमोक्रेसी को लेकर के जीते हैं, तब डिस्क्रिमिनेशन का कोई सवाल ही नहीं उठता है. और इसलिए भारत सबका साथ, सबका विकास, सबका विश्वास, सबका प्रयास, उन मूलभूत सिद्धांतों को लेकर के, और इसलिए हम चलते हैं.
Prime Minister Modi made it clear that his government will not let go of India's democratic credentials at any cost. In a massive pushback to silence critics who have trained guns on India over the issue of minority rights, President Biden also rubbished claims by former U.S. President Barack Obama on India's track record in safeguarding Muslims. Publicly defending India and the Modi government, Biden repeated Modi's claim that democracy is in India's DNA.
And it is in America's DNA, and I believe in India's DNA, that the whole world has a stake in our success, both of us, in maintaining our democracies, makes us appealing partners and enables us to expand democratic institutions around the world. And I believe this, and I still believe this.
Modi, while speaking at the US Congress, made it a point to underscore his government's Sabka Saath policy to uphold minority rights.
Our vision is Sabka Saath, Sabka Vikas, Sabka Vishwas, Sabka Prayas. It means together for everyone's growth, with everyone's trust and everyone's efforts.
Sought to silence its.
This was Modi's biggest counter ever to a powerful voice, which has been critical of his government.
जैसा राष्ट्रपति बाइडेन ने कहा, भारत और अमेरिका दोनों के डीएनए में लोकतंत्र है। लोकतंत्र हमारा स्पिरिट है। लोकतंत्र हमारी रगों में है।
Will Modi's forceful assertions silence his detractors? With Rahul Kanwal and Geeta Mohan in Washington, D.C., Bureau Report, India Today.
The most glitzy, glamorous event of the Prime Minister's state visit was the state dinner at the White House. We were at that state dinner. You had the likes of Sundar Pichai, Satya Nadella, Mukesh Ambani, Anand Mahindra, and several of the biggest names from India and the United States in that tent at the White House. It was raining outside, but a very high-powered gathering inside. Both the heads of state raising toasts. Interestingly, neither of them drink any wine, so both were raising their toast with some water in their glasses, but raising a toast to Indo-American friendship, an evening full of great conversations, an evening full of warmth, laughter, and some entertainment as well.
It was all pomp and grand at the White House in honor of the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi. The USA reserves this special treatment for its closest allies. The titans of business, fashion, entertainment and more, with the likes of designer Ralph Lauren, filmmaker M. Night Shyamalan, rubbing shoulders with tech leaders from Apple, Google and Microsoft in a state dinner hosted by the first couple of USA, where the who's who of American politics stood in attendance while India was celebrated and honored.
Welcome to Prime Minister Modi's Washington home. I've been doing it. Please have a seat. I've been doing this a long time, but I don't ever remember anybody getting a warmer welcome than this man right here. Good evening, everyone. 20 years ago, as chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, I made clear that the United States and India grew to be the closest friends and partners in the world would be a safer place. I believe that even more today, now that I'm president.
कल शाम आपने अपने घर के दरवाजे मेरे लिए खोले। स्पेशल जेस्चर के लिए आपकी मित्रता और गर्मजोशी भरे आदर सत्कार के लिए भी मैं आपका हृदय से बहुत बहुत आभारी हूं।
But before this grand dinner, Prime Minister Narendra Modi held high-level talks with US President Joe Biden at the Oval Office on not-so-comfortable issues like differences over human rights and India's stance on Russia's war in Ukraine. At the dinner party, bilateral ties and friendship were toasted too, with no alcohol.
Mr. Prime Minister, thank you for your partnership and your friendship. And to all, please join me in a toast. Mr. Prime Minister, I had an Irish grandfather named Ambrose Finnegan, and he used to say that when you give a toast and you don't have any alcohol in your glass, you must do it with your left hand. You think I'm kidding? I'm not.
Prime Minister Modi quipped with his own rejoinder.
मैंने देखा है कि आपके मेहमान नवाजी से प्रभावित होकर कई बार आपके मेहमान गाना भी गाने लगते हैं। काश मुझ में भी गाने की कला होती तो मैं भी आपको कुछ सुनाता.
Not particularly known for his humor, but the Indian Prime Minister's comment hit home. He was referring to South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol, who surprised guests when he got up on stage during a White House state dinner, honoring him in April, and belted out a rendition of American Pie, one of his favorite songs, to raucous applause.
Something touched me deep inside the day. Wow. The music died.
On Thursday, the honorable state guest on his second state dinner at the White House praised India and USA's deepening bond as the Bidens held an extravaganza, a historic state dinner.
And may we always remember that it's our people that give our partnership strength. From all the backgrounds and beliefs, they inspire us, challenge us, tell us the truth, and push us forward. They're the reason our democracies endure, evolve, reflect, and renew generation after generation.
जैसे जैसे समय गुजर रहा है, हमारे लोगों में और एक दूसरे के प्रति समझ और बढ़ रही है, एक दूसरे के नामों का सही उच्चारण कर पाते हैं, एक दूसरे के एक्सेंट को समझ पाते हैं. भारत में बच्चे हैलोवीन पर स्पाइडरमैन बनते हैं और अमेरिका के युवा नाटू नाटू पर डांस करते हैं.
The 400 distinguished guests dined on a plant-based menu of millet and corn salad, portobello mushrooms, and strawberry shortcake, catering to the Indian Prime Minister's vegetarian tastes.
Toast to our partnership, to our people, to the possibilities that lie ahead, to two great friends, two great nations, and two great powers. Cheers.
A toast to our wonderful hosts, President Biden and Dr. Jill Biden. A toast to good health, prosperity, and the pursuit of happiness, to liberty, equality, and fraternity, and to the everlasting bonds of friendship between India and the United States. Cheers.
Cheers.
Indian national flower, the lotus, was visible throughout the pavilion, along with saffron-hued floral arrangements that differed from table to table at the south lawn of the White House, as the most powerful head of state of the world admired and showed respect to the growing, most powerful head of state from Asia. It was an evening of dazzling brilliance of India on Uncle Sam's soil.
We're joined at the World War I Memorial by some very sharp think tankers, academic voices, people who study India-America relations very, very closely. So welcome to all my guests. I just want to start by introducing them. I'll start from the left. So Michael Kugelman joins us. He is the director of South Asia Institute at the Wilson Center. We've had you on many of our shows, so it's great to see you in person, Michael. Welcome. Flanking him is Daniel Marquis, Senior Advisor, South Asia at the U.S. Institute of Peace and Senior Fellow at the SACE Foreign Policy Institute. Welcome. Thank you. On my right is a man who is very actively involved with what's happening in India in many of the states. Richard Russo joins us, Senior Advisor, holds the chair in U.S.-India Policy Studies at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. Thank you very much, sir. Welcome. Tanvi Madan back with us. Tanvi, thank you so much for taking out time and joining us early in the morning. Senior Fellow at the Brookings Institute. She's tracked India, America, China very closely. And for a political perspective, we have Professor Irfan Nuruddin, Professor of Indian Politics at Georgetown University. Thank you all so much. It's a bit windy and wet, but I guess this is DC and you're all used to this weather. So
a little cooler than we usually have this time of year.
But it's fantastic to have you with us. Richard Russo, I want to start by asking you about the historical significance of what we're seeing, because a lot of people wondering, is this just hype? Is the media and the government just trying to blow this out of proportion because they've got an election coming up? Or are we truly seeing something which is historic, which will be spoken of many years from now?
Well, you see an acceleration. India, of course, faces tremendous challenges from China across a range of domains. The United States looks at those challenges as well, and we find that as an area for cooperation. But also, India just surpassed China as the most populous nation, relatively high per capita economic growth rate right now. So companies looking at it excitedly as well. So things that were almost impossible a few years ago on technology transfer, defense cooperation are happening a lot faster. And these summits help make sure that they move. It really sharpens the mind and gets people active behind the scenes.
Tanvi Madan, we saw at the White House and through this visit, the Biden administration seems to have really rolled out the red carpet. The Economist described it as the world's biggest transaction. Is this really seen as a transactional relationship, or are you seeing something transformative in terms of the relationship between India and the US?
I think, you do see that this is a strategic relationship. If you look at both the joint statement and the fact sheet, which I think people should, because you really get the details, there's definitely a strategic aspect driving this. And you see it in the sense that the focus is on security and prosperity as objectives, but doing that through building resilience through technology and talent development. So as I think President Biden put it well, where he said this is about unlocking a shared future, the Prime Minister used the term a new dawn. But I actually think people should stop making such a big fuss about transactionalism. It is good to have a certain amount of transactionalism. To me, that suggests both sides are getting something out of the relationship. It is mutually beneficial, which is the case. So I don't think, people should say, oh, this is transactional. In every relationship, there's a certain amount of transactionalism. That's normal. That's good. That's actually natural.
Professor Nuruddin, the Biden administration faced some pushback from within the Democrat camp on issues of human rights in India. We saw that question being raised in the press conference yesterday. Do you think that issue is adequately settled, or do you think this is something which will keep festering in a way that it puts some pressure on the government to taper its actions accordingly?
I don't think it will taper the actions, but I don't think the question is settled. And it's up to India to decide how that question gets asked and answered in the coming years. If there are unfortunate incidents at home, the question will continue to arise over here. You can't both be in the limelight, get the red carpet rolled out, and expect there not to be the attention even on the negative things. So the best case scenario over here is that India makes it a non-issue, that the election in 2024, as we would all expect, is free and fair, that the rhetoric that surrounds the election is civil and competitive, messy, right? But nothing that crosses the lines. And then I think the issue goes away. For some people, of course, democracy and human rights, including for Mr. Biden, is supposed to be a defining issue of the foreign policy. As long as that rhetoric is key in Washington, D.C., India should expect for there to be scrutiny, but hopefully it will continue to pass that test with flying colors.
No, but the Prime Minister took those questions head on, and I think even in his address to the US Congress and in that press conference, Tanvi, he basically kept referring to democracy being the answer, that this is a democratic government, we're answerable to the Constitution, and suggesting that hello and a warm
require that India and the United States work and lead together, and we all.
Even sky is not the limit.
Stanvi, he basically kept referring to democracy being the answer, that this is a democratic government, we're answerable to the constitution, and suggesting that there is no way in which anything that's written in the constitution will be violated, and reaffirming his commitment publicly to trying to ensure that India lives up to all constitutionally enshrined values.
Well, in India is regularly invoked democracy. You saw this even in the Prime Minister's departure statement, where he talked about shared values of diversity, democracy and freedom. But that's also why you are going to hear people then hold India to that standard, because India holds itself to that standard. And so when the Prime Minister said at the press conference that, where there is no human rights, there is no democracy, you will hear that being invoked by others. I think there's another aspect as well, right? This democracy isn't just a values thing here. It is about today, about the contrast, that it is about strategy. And, it was for some reason controversial, but President Obama's remarks yesterday, it's actually a bit of a no-brainer, right? Both the US and India should care that each country should not be so riven with internal differences that you focus internally and aren't able to play that strategic role. Second, if the theory of the case on the economic and technological side is we can be trusted partners, hint, hint, China is not, what makes India different? It's open, it's transparent, it follows the rules of the road. So democracy in its various aspects is something that both countries have invoked, and both countries will be held up to in terms of that standard.
Let's spend a moment on President Barack Obama's comments yesterday. In an interview to Christiana Manpo, Michael Kugelman, he talks about wanting President Biden to do more in his conversations with Prime Minister Modi. Is that something that did the timing strike you as being slightly odd, given the fact that Biden is a Democrat president? He used to be Obama's vice president, and this is Biden's big jamboree. He's invited a guest over, and here pops out President Obama making the kind of comments he did.
Well, let's keep in mind that President Barack Obama, when he was president, speaking in New Delhi in 2015, had made some very similar comments. So one could argue that perhaps he's had these views before, and that he didn't just decide to use the opportunity of President Biden meeting with Modi to invoke them. I think that's an important point to put out there. Clearly, President Biden was not going to take his former boss's advice and bring up the issues in that way. I mean, clearly, the administration is concerned about these issues in India, and I think that for the administration, one of the goals was simply to convey that concern in private conversations, but not to...
Hello.
American lawmakers standing in a queue to meet Prime Minister Narendra Modi at the Capitol in Washington. As Modi becomes the first Prime Minister to address US Congress twice, his 57-minute-long speech received 79 applauses, 15 standing ovations from the members of the Congress and the Indian American community in the galleries. During the address, Modi Modi chants were also heard from the galleries by the Diaspora. And what followed after showed India's rising power in international corridors. Members of the US Congress rushed to click selfies with Prime Minister Modi. Some even waiting in a queue for an autograph from the Indian Prime Minister.
While we were in the press gallery, when that speech was going on, I saw a lot of the people who were there quite gobsmacked by the fact that in the visitors' gallery, there were chants of Modi, Modi, which hadn't been heard typically. Typically it doesn't happen, right? So you got all these people almost as if it's some kind of an arena or a political rally chanting Modi, Modi in the US Congress. And that also gave to the American politicians a sense of the deep popularity that the Prime Minister enjoys to this day.
At the state dinner at the White House hosted by the Bidens, Desi Musical Connect was on full display. Rendition of Shah Rukh Khan's Tara Chaiya Chaiya was performed by the Pen Masala group, while classical violin was also heard during the event. This was a significant meeting of world's largest and oldest modern democracies. In the high-profile guest list of 400 invited attendees, who's who from different industries were seen arriving for the dinner, adorning gorgeous attire, many showcasing the Indian Connect. Business tycoons Neeta and Mukesh Ambani, who called this a historic visit. Industrialist Anand Mahindra, Google CEO Sundar Pichai, Microsoft CEO Satya Nadella, former chairperson of PepsiCo Indra Nooyi, film director M. Night Shyamalan, and many more. Also present were members of the Biden administration. Pichai was also seen obliging attendees at the state dinner with photographs. The second day of Prime Minister Modi's visit to the United States of America was clearly a star-studded affair, where he raised a toast to India-US friendship and ensuring that India cannot be ignored anymore in world politics. With Rahul Kanwal and Geeta Mohan in Washington, Bureau Report, India Today.
About the mood in America, because that's way outside congressional control or even the Biden administration's nudges and pushes. They'll make their own minds if they think it would be profitable to invest in India. Are US corporations at this moment in a let's see how it goes, dip our feet in the Indian water and then build on it? Or do you think they're more and more convinced that India could be the one place, A, because of the domestic market, B, because of geopolitical factors at play, where they should really start now building some roots?
Look, I can't speak for American corporates, but my broader sense is sort of on the one hand, on the other hand. On the one hand, there's certainly an openness to India. There's an enthusiasm about India. This isn't a partisan issue. This isn't just a congressional issue. There's a broader openness and an interest in India that I think we'll see in the private sector as well. On the other hand, there's lots of other places that the United States is looking to invest, and it's really up to India to capitalize on this moment. You know, you opened this conversation with a question about whether this is really a historic meeting, and the answer will be if in a few years from now we can look back and say this was the moment that the United States said yes, and India then moved forward on a variety of cooperative measures and ventures, both state to state and private sector, and really seized that opportunity, the opportunity provided by the conflict with China, and also the opportunity on the defense side provided by questions about Russia as a reliable supplier of Indian equipment, and whether the United States could fill some of those gaps. When we begin to see that, then we'll look back at this moment and say, yeah, that was historic. But that's up to India. A lot of the action will be on the Indian side.
Mm-hmm. Let's spend a moment on politics, because there's a big election both in India and the US up next year. And American politics are more fractious at this moment than Indian politics, which seems a bit more settled. But of course, things can change, and who knows? It's a election, and things happen in elections. But do you think that has any bearing at all? Because if you see President Biden, when he came in, there were concerns that given that Prime Minister Modi had been part of that Howdy Trump mega jamboree, and that Kamala Harris was on the vice presidential ticket, that there may be concerns. He seems to have aced navigating this relationship and building on it, despite being a very different public personality from Prime Minister Modi.
I think, we've seen in the United States, you can't find two candidates that are probably more different than President Trump and President Biden And yet, President Trump really recreated the Quad. President Biden doubled down on it. The concept of Indo-Pacific has remained throughout. So if you see continuity on policy towards India between, successive presidents that are this different from each other, I have high confidence that whoever is going to be next will maintain that as well. In India, you think of the Modi government and expectations that they've got a pretty good chance at returning to power. If they don't, if they're brought in for a coalition, that's again where the United States needs to make sure that we're constantly engaging a lot of these regional parties that we've seen in times past. I mean, those that have been on the India beat for just 8 or 9 years, they think single party majority is the norm in India. Those of us that have been doing it a little bit longer realize coalitions are common, and coalition moments have actually been the biggest obstacle sometimes to getting big things done. So even if Modi government comes back but loses a few seats, they're forced into a coalition, it could be a lot of these regional parties that could be king and queen makers on big things happening. So engaging those is going to be important for us to keep in mind as well.
The India-US relationship, Tanvi, has been marching forward at different speeds, regardless of who's in power in India or in Washington. Do you think the election next year and the fact that you've got two personalities who seem to have hit a particular moment just at this instance, does that make any difference in terms of accelerating the speed of building on this relationship? Or do you think there's enough of an institutional framework where whoever it is in power, it doesn't really matter, it only is tangentially consequential?
So I think it's quite clear that both sides, recognizing that after many years you're going to have India and the US go to election in the same year, that they wanted to try to get as much done in this visit, in President Biden's visit for the G20, but potentially also for a Quad summit that will be held in India, to try to get as much done before both sides start getting involved in their election years. And then momentum just slows from the government side. But I think the test of this relationship, when it will become truly natural, so to speak, is when you don't need the governments constantly facilitating, that they just create the enabling environment and the private sector takes on, the labs take on, the civil society, universities. And so if you go back and look at what they have, all these initiatives, it's about saying, look, we've done our work as much as possible. Our bureaucracies will continue to work. We've sent them the signal. But look, we are going to be involved in our elections, our domestic politics. You guys now need to move this forward.
What's your sense of President Biden's re-election chances at this moment in the manner in which American politics is shaping up?
If I get this right, you got to buy me dinner at Bukhara in Delhi. I think at this point you'd have to say that Mr. Biden's in a good position. The economy has done much better than everyone expected, and the Republican Party is about to go through a nomination fight that's going to be extremely bruising. Right? And so anytime an incumbent is running for election, the odds are in their favor in the American context. The 2020 election where Mr. Trump lost was the exception that in some ways proved the rule. It was really unusual. So Biden has the advantage, but it's going to be a really ugly campaign, regardless of what happens. America, as you pointed out in your lead into this conversation, is as fractious as it's been in a long time. And key to that is a real debate about what America's role in the world is. You can't both have America sort of go out, be a force for good in the world, and have America being made great again with a very internal isolationist bent. India could be collateral damage in that fight. And look, one of the reasons that you might see a sense of not caution, a lot of enthusiasm for what's happened over the last 24 hours is because, well, some of us are older than others, but I mean, we remember 2007. You want to talk about two leaders putting a lot of personal political capital into getting the U.S.-India civil nuclear deal. That was the game changer. It was supposed to be the same announcements that we're talking about today, the same language. But 16 years later, we know that that just never came to fruition. And as my colleagues have pointed out, that's because governments can put us on the right strategic path. But if you can't get private sector buy-in at every level, you don't deliver on the full potential. And we are going to have to see, I love the way Dan put it, we'll know whether this was a historic moment a decade from now, right? When we'll know whether or not many of these announcements really not only came to fruition, but generated even more investment, even more deep partnership, such that we're no longer wondering whether or not the two leaders have a personal rapport, because there's just so much else happening. So we're going to have to see. But right now, I'm betting on Biden coming back.
That's a very important point you make, because if you remember the amount of noise and hype there was around the US-India nuclear deal, at the end of it, there's very little tangible takeaway for either side from that deal, particularly here in the US. So in the last part of this conversation, I want to focus on where the relationship goes from here. Richard, we're seeing America and lots of American companies talking now about more de-risking than decoupling from China. Where do you see India and the United States go on the back of this state visit?
Well, I think when we talk about corporates, there's a real tension in boardrooms, a place I spend a lot of time in with large companies. You've got top executives that they look at the numbers, the population growth, the economic growth, and they know they need a massive presence in India in the future if they don't have it today. But the tension lies with the fact that it is still really tough to do business. And a lot of the challenges that companies face, including some of those that had big announcements yesterday, getting reliable access to electric power, flexible labor regulations, these kind of basics that China and Vietnam and others provide in droves. And these are things controlled by state governments. It's not anything that Prime Minister Modi can snap his fingers. Even states controlled by the BJP don't always follow suit. So I think getting those engagements to be more subnational oriented, getting state governments to get a lot of this stuff right, to attract those investments. Once we start hitting $200 billion, $300 billion in annual trade, then the momentum behind this becomes pretty unstoppable.
Daniel, what do you see as being the next step in this relationship between India and the United States? What would you be looking out for most closely?
Well, look, I don't know if it's the next big step, but you asked the question about whether the two sides are prepared to actually seize this moment and what is going to happen in the coming political year. And the question is whether the two bureaucracies can pick up on what's already been done and kind of keep the ball rolling while both President Biden and Prime Minister Modi go back to the polls and have to contest elections. That's the thing I'm going to be watching, because a lot of this, the tendency is you make huge announcements and then things kind of begin to fall apart when you leave it in other people's hands. To what extent do you need top-level, presidential level engagement to keep the momentum going? And if you need a lot of that, I'm afraid that the coming, 2024 is going to be a tough year.
Michael, you want to answer that? Because now beginning to rain quite heavily, so we'll just start winding down very quickly. Yes.
I think that this relationship is one with multiple tracks right now. That's very clear. And for me, the new partnerships in higher education, particularly those focused on STEM, are a really big deal. Going to what had been said earlier about how this relationship doesn't necessarily need or shouldn't need to be driven only by official-to-official relations. So I think that these higher education partnerships and all of that, that's something that I'll be watching. But absolutely, as was noted before, the momentum is key. There's a lot of momentum for the relationship. This state visit really puts it right at the top, so to speak. But yeah, with both governments soon going into election campaign mode, it's important that you have momentum taken on by those outside of government and outside of politics.
Professor Nuruddin, I want to talk to you about the new education policy and whether you think American universities are seriously looking at coming and setting up campuses or collaborating, joint degrees. It's been spoken of a lot with hope. I spoke to the American ambassador to India and others. They're talking about it. But will it actually happen in reality?
It's going to be slow moving. There's a lot of enthusiasm. Anyone who teaches at American universities knows the pool of talent that exists in India, right? Indian Americans who are on the faculty like myself, and of course the incredible number of Indian students who come over here. There's a great interest among American students to go study in India. But Rahul, it's hard. Every part of that bureaucracy is still really complicated. The simple act of getting a student visa to go to India is complicated. We all know, if you've ever stood in line at the U.S. consulate to get a visa here, what a difficult experience that can be. There's a lot of progress to be made over there, but we've talked a little bit about the human rights situation. It's not worth dwelling on over here, but don't underestimate the degree to which a lot of universities look at the situation there and say, how do we think about academic freedom in this context? How do we think about what a genuine partnership will look like? But I think you're going to see a lot more announcements, including hopefully from my university, about partnerships that are serious, about joint programs with credible Indian partners. The potential of the Indian higher education market is recognized by everyone in this space, and you're going to see that opportunity. And look, one thing we haven't talked about today is that the diaspora pushes this incredibly. Young people, young Indian Americans are keen to go home, they're keen to be more engaged, and education is a great pathway for that.
Well, we're fully committed to this equation and this relationship. As you can see, we're standing out in the rain. But Tanvi, you know both India and the United States very closely. Given everything that we've seen, what scares you the most? What do you think can go wrong?
Lots of things can go wrong, but I would say, if you don't implement, if you focus on, the strategic, the words, the visit happens, and these kind of visits are called action-forcing events. So they force the action where you get all the agreements, and then momentum falls. You get you get kind of involved in internal situations, you become more insular. That can happen because in either country that we start struggling with our democracies, that we are so involved in fighting each other that we don't focus on the path ahead. And frankly, countries like China would take advantage of that and actually tell the rest of the world, look, these messy democracies can't get anything done. I will say though, Rahul, and I do want to put this on the record, as the one historian around here, since we're talking about historic moments, I do think the US-India nuclear deal was historic. And it was because you would not see anything that happened today without what that represented, which was the first moment that the US actually lifted export control restrictions. So yes, there might not be Westinghouse nuclear reactors, but that moment encapsulated kind of a lot more. So, you say it's not successful. I'll tell you as the historian, the 10-year metric that Dan laid out, yes, as we look back, I'm the one who's going to write the history. I'm writing a book right now. That moment was historic. And if this moment is like that, you're definitely going to see a movement.
It paved the way for what followed. And that, in that sense, of course, it was massively consequential. I really want to thank all of you for joining us, braving the inclement weather. Really appreciate you taking out time. And thank you so much and wish you all the best. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.
Where the software engineer meets the smart market analyst, meets the gifted content writer to create the big dream. The world comes together at Sharda University. So where are you? Where the software engineer meets the smart market analyst, meets the talented photographer to create the big dream. The world comes together at Sharda University. So where are you?
What are you making, ma'am, of what we've seen at play, a huge amount of bonhomie between the Indian Prime Minister and the American President in display, not just at the White House Oval Office, but even at the lawns of the south lawns of the White House? Smriti ji, welcome.
Well, I think the gods have conspired to make sure that the visit is extremely grand and successful. As you know that there is an Indian belief that when something very auspicious is to happen, the rain gods make their presence felt. And the fact that the Indo-US relationship cannot be looked upon myopically only from a strategic cooperation vis-a-vis defense, today begets a conversation around new opportunities that we have with this bilateral relationship. One in the sector of AI, another in the sector of semiconductors, then there is the sector of quantum computing and physics, then there is an opportunity in the green hydrogen mission, then you see an opportunity in biotechnology that Indian pharmaceutical companies are currently manufacturing in 14 locations around the United States of America, speaks volumes about the potential that is yet to be unleashed, that 40% of generic drug formulations in the US emanate from India, again speaks about our healthcare capacities that can be leveraged for the US market, that we have 200 active collaborations between Indian and US labs, again cements my position vis-a-vis healthcare, that a nation state which was a part of a cartoon years ago when it came to India's space mission, where I still remember a legendary cartoon behind a glass door which said NASA, was an Indian farmer with a cow trying to knock and find a way in, to now the Economist at the front page putting President Biden and India depicted as a tiger. We have come a long way.
Why does this happen? Let me tell you the science behind it.
For more informative videos like this, keep watching India Today News Mode.
One of the big moments for Prime Minister Narendra Modi during his state visit to Washington DC was the address at the joint sitting of the US Congress, the second time the Prime Minister was invited there. Interestingly, there were more than a dozen occasions where the Prime Minister received a standing ovation. In fact, there were a lot of Indian Americans in the visitors gallery right above where the congressmen and the senators were sitting, and they were chanting Modi, Modi, and a lot of the American press that were there were quite shocked by the fact that you had these chants inside the US Congress, which obviously isn't a common sighting over there. Also, soon after the visit got over and before, the congressman greeted the Prime Minister very warmly. Lots of autographs being taken, selfies as well. And many of those congressmen, senators told us later, off camera of course, that they seemed quite envious of the kind of popularity the Prime Minister enjoyed in a distant country. These aren't necessarily his voters, they're his supporters, but not his voters. And they seem to be treating him with a certain adulation, which was quite the envy of all the American politicians who were gathered at the US Congress.
Prime Minister Narendra Modi's historic second address to the US Congress. The Prime Minister walked into loud cheer and applause as lawmakers welcomed him. Flanked by US Vice President Kamala Harris, the Prime Minister received a rock star welcome. Lawmakers stood up and applauded as he walked up to the podium to deliver his address. Chants of Modi Modi from members of the Indian American lawmakers and members of the Indian Diaspora reverberated the Grand House chamber at the US Capitol.
Members of Congress, I have the high privilege and distinct honor of presenting to you His Excellency Narendra Modi, the Prime Minister of the Republic of India.
In a scathing attack on Pakistan, Prime Minister reiterated that there can be no double standards in dealing with terror. He called on the world to act against state sponsors of terror.
More than 2 decades after 9/11 and more than a decade after 26/11 in Mumbai, radicalism and terrorism still remain a pressing danger for the whole world. We must overcome all such forces sponsoring and exporting terror.
Prime Minister Modi also referred to China amid its aggressive military maneuvering in the strategically vital Indo-Pacific region.
The dark clouds of coercion and confrontation are casting their shadow in the Indo-Pacific. The stability of the region has become one of the central concerns of our partnership. We share a vision of a free, open, and inclusive Indo-Pacific. We also remember,
noting that the Ukraine conflict
others
is causing great pain in the region,
work
Modi
for
said that this is
liberty,
not an era of war,
equality,
once again appealing for dialogue and
justice.
diplomacy.
This is not an era of war. But it is one of dialogue and diplomacy. And we all must do what we can to stop the bloodshed and human suffering.
Modi paid rich tribute to the Indian American community's success and cited Vice President Kamala Harris as a glowing example.
There are millions here who have roots in India. Some of them sit proudly in this chamber. And there is one behind me who
Prime Minister Modi also hailed woman power and said that they will lead the world towards a better future.
Women's sages composed many verses in these Vedas. And today, in modern India, women are leading us to a better future.
Modi sang a couplet written by him to stress India's steely resolve in the global arena.
आसमान में सिर उठाकर, आसमान में सिर उठाकर, घने बादलों को चीरकर, रोशनी का संकल्प ले, अभी तो सूरज उगा है.
Modi received 15 standing ovations and 79 applauses during his hour-long speech.
I think more than anything, he talked about the future and the future alliance between the United States and India, how great that's going to be. And it was a very moving speech.
The message from the Prime Minister is very positive and very exciting to see the relationship between the United States and India.
God bless America. Jai Hind. Long live India-US friendship. Thank you.
Amid Modi and Bharat Mata Ki Jai chants, the Prime Minister was mobbed for selfies and autographs both by US lawmakers and Indian Americans. With Rahul Kanwal and Geeta Mohan in Washington, D.C., Bureau Report, India Today.
This is where we wrap up the NewsTrack tonight. For your time and your trust, thank you very much. We're in Washington, D.C., tracking different aspects of the Prime Minister's visit. So we'll continue our broadcast over the next 24 hours from Washington, D.C. The Prime Minister doing the big Diaspora event in a few hours from now at the Kennedy Center. He'll be doing an address as well. He's meeting U.S. businessmen right now. Several of the tech titans meeting the Prime Minister. So we're tracking his engagements and also what emerges from each of these meetings. Thank you for tuning in, and I look forward to seeing you at 8 p.m. tomorrow. Goodbye. Good night. Played such an important role in this visit by the Indian Prime Minister. Could you begin by giving us your sense of what you think is the biggest takeaway from Prime Minister Modi's state visit to the US?
Well, first of all, welcome to the United States. It was extraordinary to see almost 3,000 people on the White House lawn. And of course, the galleries are going to be packed, as is the House, when the Prime Minister comes and addresses the United States Congress later today. I believe the enthusiasm for the relationship is grounded on common interests and common values, a defense interest to make sure that China doesn't emerge as a hegemon in Asia or threaten the sovereignty of nations, an interest in solving climate and solving scientific issues together, and an interest economically in partnering to make sure that our workers and our companies succeed.
I was seeing that in California, you've been facing some pushback on account of the role that you've played in trying to build the India-America relationship. Do you want to talk a bit about that, this criticism that's being flung the way of President Biden, and how he's been able to, leave what the naysayers are saying on the side and really focus on what can be done to take the India-America relationship to the next level?
Well, I have faced criticism for helping play a role in inviting the Prime Minister to address Congress. But I have the same philosophy as President Obama, which is that you talk to leaders, especially of allies, and no country agrees with everything. Of course, it's important to respect human rights, and it's important for India's own cohesion to embrace pluralism. And that is part of a conversation with India. But to have that conversation, you have to engage with the leaders and respect the leaders. And that is what this is about. So I don't think that the criticism is justified.
Weather forecast now. Delhi, maximum 42 and minimum 27 degrees. Mumbai, maximum 30 and minimum 28 degrees. Kolkata, maximum 35 and minimum 26 degrees. Bangalore, maximum 30 and minimum 21 degrees. Chennai, maximum 32 and minimum 27 degrees. Hyderabad, maximum 28 and minimum 24 degrees.
It's hot, bright and uncomfortable, and you simply can't get yourself to step out of your well air-conditioned homes. You don't feel like going for a run. Who wants to sweat it out when the heat is already ensuring that? Does this sound like a familiar story? Do you feel lazy, hot and demotivated to get moving in the summers? You aren't alone, but here's why you must work out in summers.
See, we humans are not built to sit and relax. And workout is actually a need for every human. In the summers, I don't think you need to change the exercises. But yes, you can change the pattern. Summers are great for exercising because your body is already warmed up. Summers are also great because the pressure in your joints decreases during summer, which makes it easy for anyone to stay active. Also, summers are great to get shredded. So if your goal is to build muscle, build endurance and lose fat, summers are awesome.
Exercise has loads of health benefits, and research says it reduces chances of heart disease, stroke and diabetes. While the body can get stressed in the heat, some people have recently been driven away from the gym because of recent cases of heart failure while working out. Coming back to the summer heat, there's a list of do's and don'ts while working out in summers. Choose the right apparel. Look for dry, fit clothes, as they have the ability to dry very quickly, which is very helpful while sweating, as generally cotton is preferred by a lot of people in summers.
But cotton is good for casual clothing but not for exercising, as cotton absorbs sweat and gets heavy. Our bodies are 50 to 70% water, and in summers we need more water to keep the body functioning properly, so you need to aim for at least 2 to 3 liters of water. In case you show any signs of dizziness, extreme thirst, nausea, cramps or dry mouth, etc., then immediately stop the activity and look for a cool spot to relax and drink a sports drink. Once you feel better, then try to rest or slowly start with the activity, but make sure to listen to your body.
So in summers, if you want to work out in summers and you want to work out outdoors, then you should work out early in the morning or late in the evening. If you are working out after 10 a.m. or before 5 p.m., then there are high chances of heat strokes. So if you are someone who likes to work out in the outdoors, especially in summers, then make sure that your workout should finish before 9 a.m. or 8 a.m.
During summers, the sun's heat is very intense, which can take a toll on your body. It's important to avoid being in the sun from 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. as the sun is the strongest at that time. Regular physical activity is one of the most important things you can do for your health. Everyone can experience the health benefits of physical activity. Age, abilities, ethnicity, shape or size do not matter.